I'm Kamarie Holland's mommy, and she wouldn't want nothing in the world but to donate her toys to another little child that was in need because she was a very healthy child.
This isn't an easy story to tell, but it's one that needs to be heard. 5-year-old Kamarie Holland was just a child, full of life, full of dreams. She should have been safe, protected by the people who were supposed to love her the most. Instead, her mother made an unthinkable choice. She handed her over to a man with a history of violence and abuse, and because of that choice, Kamarie never got the chance to grow up. Her story isn't just a tragedy, it's a betrayal. A mother who abandoned her child in the worst way imaginable. A man who should never have been allowed near a child. A system that failed to step in until it was too late. I wish I didn't have to tell stories like this. But ignoring them won't change the fact that they happen. As we unravel this case, we'll see it from different perspectives. The father left to grieve, the investigators who fought to uncover the truth, and the harsh reality of Kamarie's life in the days leading up to her death. This case forces us to confront emotions we all recognize. The fear for our children, the shock of betrayal, and the unbearable pain of losing an innocent life too soon. It's not an easy story, but it's one we can't turn away from. Because only by facing these harsh realities can we start to protect the most vulnerable among us. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank you. Everyone who watches, comments, and shares these stories. Your support helps keep these cases in the spotlight and make sure the victims are never forgotten. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join this growing community. Now, let's get into the case. Kamarie Holland was a little girl with a bright smile and a big imagination. At 5 years old, the world was still full of wonder. She wasn't weighed down by life's harsh realities, not yet. In her eyes, she was a princess, a little girl with her whole future ahead of her, a future she never got to see. She lived with her father, Kamarie Holland, in Phoenix City, Alabama. Kamarie was the kind of father who was always there. He made breakfast in the mornings, helped with homework, and did everything he could to make sure Kamarie felt safe and loved. He wasn't perfect, but he never stopped trying. He did everything he could to give his daughter a good life. But in the end, it wasn't enough to save her. For Kamarie, her father's love was everything. She adored spending time with him, and he made sure she felt cherished every single day. Their bond was unbreakable, built on trust, warmth, and an unspoken promise that she would always be safe. But then came the weekend. The weekend she was supposed to spend at her mother's house. She was excited, overjoyed even. For a little girl, weekends with mom felt like an adventure, a change from her everyday routine. Kamarie hesitated as he always did. A father's instinct told him to be cautious, but when he saw the joy in Kamarie's eyes, he pushed his concerns aside. He had to believe that Christy, her mother, would take care of her. At least, that's what he hoped. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that this would be the last time he'd ever see his little girl alive. The relationship between Kamarie's parents, Kamarie and Christy, was complicated. It wasn't the kind of co-parenting built on mutual respect or shared goals for their daughter's future. Instead, it was fraught with tension, resentment, and wounds that had never healed. Kamarie loved Kamarie deeply, but he also feared for her. Christy's struggles weren't a secret. Her battles with substance abuse cast a long, dark shadow over her ability to be a stable mother. She wasn't always present. She wasn't always sober. And more than once, Kamarie had questioned if she was even capable of taking care of Kamarie the way she deserved. He tried to talk to her, tried to reason with her, but Christy wasn't ready to listen. The addiction had its grip on her, and no matter how much she may have loved her daughter, it was clear where her priorities lay. Kamarie worried constantly. He knew his daughter needed stability, something Christy couldn't always offer. And yet, despite the warnings in his gut, despite every hesitation screaming at him to say no, he let Kamarie go that weekend. Because she was happy. because she was too young to see the danger, and because he wanted to believe, just this once, that things would be different. December 12th, 2021, a Sunday. A day that should have been like any other. But for Kamarie, it would become the day he'd regret for the rest of his life. That morning, Christy arrived at his door to pick up Kamarie. Despite the custody battle he had fought so hard for, she still had visitation rights. And as much as he despised the arrangement, he knew how much it meant to Kamarie. The moment the door opened, Kamarie's face lit up. She squealed with delight, launching herself into her mother's arms, completely unaware of the tension tightening in her father's chest. Corey watched them, feeling that familiar ache settle in his stomach. A part of him wanted to say no, to keep her close, to protect her. But another part, the part that just wanted his daughter to be happy, let go. With one last hug, one final kiss on her forehead, he watched as Kamarie climbed into Christy's car. She waved at him from the window, smiling. And then she was gone. Christy's home in Columbus, Georgia, wasn't much. A small house in a quiet neighborhood. But a house was just a house. It wasn't a home. And it was nowhere near the safe haven Kamarie needed. There was always something off about Christy's house. The mess, the lingering sense of disorder. Like she was trying to hold things together, but everything kept slipping through her fingers. On the morning of December 13th, 2021, Christy Sipple woke up to an empty house. She glanced at the clock. 6 a.m. Her first thought was of Kamarie. Her little girl should have been right there, safe in bed. But when she walked into the living room, something was wrong. The front door stood wide open, and Kamarie was gone. Panic set in. Christy tore through the house, checking every room, calling her daughter's name. Nothing. No sign of a struggle. No footprints leading away. Just an eerie silence that sent a chill through her. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice shaking. "My daughter is gone," she said. "I woke up and she was just... gone." The dispatcher tried to calm her down, asking the usual questions. When was the last time she saw Kamarie? What time did she go to bed? Christy's answers came rushed and frantic. She claimed Kamarie had been asleep when she went to bed, that she had no idea how she could have just disappeared. But when the police arrived, things weren't adding up. The Columbus Police Department responded immediately, searching the area around Christy's home. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no struggle, no clear evidence that Kamarie had been taken in the middle of the night. And then, the investigation took a darker turn. Authorities from Phoenix City were called in, and soon, a task force was formed to dig deeper into what really happened. Investigators combed through phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements. And soon, a different story started to emerge, one that didn't match Christy's panicked call to 911. The breakthrough came with one name, Jeremy Williams. A man with a past so disturbing, it sent shivers down the spines of even seasoned detectives. Back in 2005, while living in Alaska, Williams had been the prime suspect in the death of his own daughter, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. In 2009, after moving to Phoenix City, he was accused of brutally abusing a 3-year-old boy. Once again, the case fell apart due to lack of evidence. Now, his name was coming up in connection to Kamarie's disappearance, and this time, the evidence was stacking up fast. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from the night Kamarie vanished. What they found shattered Christy's version of events, because she wasn't alone that night. The cameras showed Christy with Jeremy Williams. This wasn't just a passing acquaintance. There was a connection, one Christy had conveniently left out of her story. And then came one of the most disturbing details. The day after Kamarie's death, while most parents would be consumed by grief, Christy was spotted packing up her daughter's belongings, her toys, her clothes, and donating them to charity. It was unsettling. Parents don't just get rid of their child's things right after losing them, especially not under these circumstances. It was cold, calculated, like she was erasing Kamarie's existence before the truth could fully come out. But Christie's past had already begun painting an even darker picture. In 2018, she had been charged with child neglect after her newborn tested positive for methamphetamines. It wasn't her first run-in with the law. There were records of child endangerment charges, multiple failures to appear in court, a pattern of reckless, dangerous behavior. Now, police weren't just looking at Christie as a grieving mother. They were looking at an accomplice, someone who had made a choice that led to her daughter's death. Christie had entrusted her daughter to a man with a dark history of violence and abuse, and now Kamarie was gone, taken forever. As the investigation unfolded, authorities uncovered that Christie's connection to Jeremy ran deeper than they'd originally thought. They weren't merely acquaintances. They were close. Jeremy wasn't just someone in her life. He was someone she trusted. And the more the police uncovered, the clearer it became that he might have been involved in far more than Kamarie's disappearance. Could he have orchestrated the whole thing, using Christie to gain access to Kamarie? The truth was just out of reach, but each discovery added a layer of dread. Then, on December 14th, 2021, just a day after Kamarie's disappearance, the police received the call that no parent should ever hear. They had found Kamarie's body. The house where they discovered her was a hollow shell of neglect. Cold, abandoned. It felt forgotten, as if the world had turned its back on it long ago. Isolated at the outskirts of the neighborhood, much like the horrors that had transpired within its walls. No one had lived there for years, yet on that night, it became the final resting place for a 5-year-old girl. Kamarie's lifeless body was found in the basement, the scene as horrific as it was heartbreaking. She had been brutally strangled with a ligature, her tiny, fragile form left to succumb to the cold, the air offering no comfort. But it wasn't just the violent way she was killed. It was the abuse she had endured before her death. A child who had been robbed of everything, her future, her innocence, and most tragically, her safety. For Kamarie's father, Corey, the news was gut-wrenching. His little girl, the daughter he had fought so fiercely to protect, had been taken from him in a senseless, brutal act. The shock was unimaginable. The pain was so raw, it felt as though his heart had been torn from his chest. He had trusted Christie. He had trusted that Kamarie would be safe. And now, she was gone. The grief, the guilt, the disbelief, it consumed him. The community, too, was left in a state of disbelief. Columbus and Phoenix City were shaken to their core. They had watched Kamarie grow, seen her run through the streets with the same wide-eyed joy that belonged to all children. Now, they were faced with the stark reality that a child they had known was gone. Her life stolen by those who should have been her protectors. The discovery of Kamarie's body marked a critical turning point in the investigation. It was no longer just about finding a missing child. It became about seeking justice for a little girl failed by the very people who should have loved her most. The case was no longer a tragic loss. It was a call for accountability, for the truth to be revealed no matter how dark. Jeremy Williams had been on the run for days, but it didn't take long for authorities to close in. On December 15, 2021, less than 48 hours after Kamarie's body was discovered, Jeremy was tracked to a seedy motel in Phoenix City, Alabama, the Bamboo Motel, a dilapidated place where you wouldn't want to stay unless you had nowhere else to go. Jeremy had checked in only hours before, and when law enforcement arrived, they found him there, hiding in plain sight. The capture was almost anticlimactic. There was no dramatic chase, no frantic escape. The authorities knew exactly where he was, and it was only a matter of time before they apprehended him. When the officers entered his room, Jeremy didn't try to flee. Instead, he seemed resigned, almost as if he had known the inevitable was coming. They took him into custody, and the tension in the air grew thick as soon as they did. The questions came quickly. Jeremy's responses were slow, deliberate, as if he were holding something back. But the detectives weren't fooled. They saw the cracks in his story, the lies beginning to unravel. His mind had already started betraying him. The interrogation began with the basics. Where had he been the night Kamarie went missing? What role had he played? At first, Jeremy remained calm, but it didn't take long for the facade to collapse. The man, burdened by a long criminal history, began to reveal more than he intended. With unsettling calm, Jeremy admitted his role in Kamarie's death. His words, however, were chillingly casual, as if it were just another grim action in a series of terrible decisions he had made. What stunned investigators was not just Jeremy's confession, but the chilling lack of remorse that accompanied it. His words were laced with a cold indifference, as though he was recounting an ordinary, inconsequential event. To Jeremy, Kamarie was simply another name in a long list of victims. She was just another face in the background of his twisted history, no more significant than the others he had harmed. His past, his long trail of sexual abuse, littered with victims and destroyed lives, wasn't mere hearsay. It was a dark, undeniable truth that stretched back years. Too many broken lives, too many destroyed futures. But what was most disturbing was that, despite the ever-growing body count, Jeremy had always managed to slip away. His crimes had often been buried beneath a veil of doubt, just enough uncertainty for him to escape justice. As the investigation into Jeremy's role in Kamarie's death intensified, the authorities dug deeper. They reopened cases from the past, cases that had been dismissed or left unsolved. They began connecting the dots, revealing a network of horrifying acts stretching back over a decade. And with every new revelation, it became increasingly clear. Jeremy's time was running out. The walls were closing in. The confession, however, wasn't the only shock to come. With the investigation unfolding, police began to uncover a horrific truth about 𝐸ℐ𝐸 involvement in the crime. It wasn't simply that she had allowed her daughter to be with Jeremy. It was that she had actively sold her daughter. She had traded her child for money, turning her into a commodity in the twisted underworld of human trafficking. The revelation hit the community like a sledgehammer. Christy, once seen as a victim of circumstance, was now exposed as a willing participant in her daughter's abuse and death. She hadn't just neglected her daughter, she had orchestrated the tragedy. In her desperate pursuit of money, Christy had handed her own flesh and blood over to a predator, condemning her to an unspeakable fate. The shock was palpable. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the mother they thought they knew with the monstrous reality of her betrayal. How could anyone, let alone a mother, betray her child so brutally? It shattered the illusion of safety that the community had once felt, upending everything they had believed about the people around them. For Corey, the devastation was almost too much to bear. For months, he had justified Christy's actions, attributing her failures to addiction or personal circumstances. But the truth was far worse. The woman who had once promised to love and protect his daughter had actively participated in her suffering and death. It was a betrayal beyond comprehension. Corey's grief was overwhelming, consuming him in ways he couldn't put into words. How could he forgive Christy for what she had done? How could he process the gut-wrenching reality that the very woman he had once trusted with his child had played a direct hand in her death? As the case moved toward trial, the legal proceedings took on a new weight. The wheels of justice were turning, but the road ahead was fraught with the heavy burden of grief, anger, and the ever-present ache of loss. The full extent of the crimes was now clear, but for Kamarie and the community, the scars would never fully heal. Jeremy Williams's trial took a surprising turn when he pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. His admission of guilt wasn't in question, but he tried to argue that his mental state should excuse him from full responsibility. The public response was immediate and furious. Many were outraged at the idea of him possibly evading justice due to his mental condition. People had followed the case closely and were demanding accountability. The plea did little to sway the court of public opinion, and the outcry was deafening. Williams faced numerous severe charges, including first-degree capital murder, human trafficking, and abuse of a corpse. On April 24, 2024, he was handed 4 death sentences for his involvement in Kamarie Holland's murder and abuse. The legal process surrounding the death penalty in the United States is lengthy, so it's expected that Williams will spend years on death row before his execution. However, in December 2024, news surfaced that he was appealing his sentence with a state-appointed attorney. Meanwhile, Christie's legal case took an unexpected twist. In a surprising move, she pled guilty to human trafficking. There was no contesting the charges. Everything she did was laid out for the court and the public to see. While the seriousness of her actions was clear, the potential outcome of her case left many baffled. As the charges were read aloud, the courtroom was in disbelief. How could a mother who had actively sold her own daughter, knowingly enabling such unimaginable abuse and eventual murder, receive just 20 years in prison? To many, it felt like an insult to Kamarie's memory and to Corey, the father who fought relentlessly to keep his daughter safe. Public outrage surged. Many felt that Christie's actions deserved far harsher punishment. How could a justice system allow someone responsible for such evil to receive so little? The anger wasn't just directed at Christie, but at the entire system that appeared to fail Kamarie time and time again. To many, it was a devastating betrayal, especially to those who had known Kamarie and hoped she would have a future. Kamarie Holland's grief was incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't experienced it. It was a quiet, suffocating pain that seemed never-ending. The hole left by Kamarie's loss would never be filled. Every day, Corey questioned his decision to let her go to Christie that weekend. He had always been a loving, protective father, doing everything he could to keep Kamarie safe. And yet, the voice of guilt never stopped. What if I had kept her with me? What if I hadn't let her go? The question haunted him relentlessly. The grief wasn't just about losing his daughter. It was about feeling responsible for failing her in the worst possible way. That guilt would never fade, no matter how much time passed. As the trial ended and the legal proceedings drew to a close, the moral questions remained. How could a mother betray her child like that? How could 𝐸ℏ𝐸Å the very person who should have been her protector, facilitate Kamarie's suffering? The community struggled to understand how anyone could commit such an atrocity. It shattered the belief that all people are inherently good, and left everyone questioning how something so horrific could happen in the first place. Could we ever truly understand the reasons behind Christie's actions? Or was she simply incapable of seeing the destruction she caused? As Kamarie's life ends in heartbreak, we are left grappling with these difficult questions. How do we prevent this from happening again? How do we shield our most vulnerable, our children, from those who would harm, exploit, or worst of all, trade them for money? The answers are not simple, but they begin with awareness. We must ensure these crimes do not slip through the cracks of our system and demand better protections for our children. Kamarie's life was filled with potential, with love and joy. She was a princess in the making, full of dreams. Her future was stolen, her innocence shattered, by the very people who should have protected her. As we reflect on her story, we remember the vibrant little girl who never had a chance to see her dreams realized. We remember Kamarie Holland, not just as a victim, but as a light that continues to shine in the hearts of those who loved her. In 2021 alone, Georgia saw 106,148 reports of child abuse and neglect. Out of these, more than 9,800 were confirmed, while nearly 39,000 children received alternative services like family support. Shockingly, 64% of these cases were due to neglect, with parents or guardians failing to protect their children, leaving them vulnerable and without help. This isn't just a state issue, it's a community issue. Let's focus on Columbus, Georgia, the heart of Kamarie's story. In Muscogee County, which includes Columbus, there were 1,870 reports of child maltreatment in just 1 year, affecting over 1,600 children. This abuse rate is higher than the state average, with 184 kids removed from their homes due to neglect and dangers like substance abuse. But behind the numbers are real children, real futures, and real families who need help. The truth is, we can do better. we can prevent tragedies like this. Education and resources are key. Providing parents with the tools to raise healthy, happy children is crucial. Offering mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and parenting support can stop situations like Kamarie's from escalating. But it doesn't end there. We must strengthen the system, ensuring child protective services have the resources and support to respond quickly and effectively. It's about protecting every child, not just those already in danger, but also those at risk. We can't afford to be passive anymore. Kamarie Holland's story, while tragic, is also a call to action. She was a little girl with dreams of being a princess. Though her life was cut short, we owe it to her, and to all children like her, to ensure their futures are brighter. What are your thoughts on this case? Share your reflections in the comments.